Okay, so welcome to Design Workshop Day 5. So today we're looking at how we take our design concepts and turn them into something buildable. We need to translate the rough ideas we had, those elements of design, the color, form, movement, texture, etc. And we need to take those and turn them into something that our crew can actually build and put on stage. So that was kind of your assignment this week, was to start looking at how to do that. And I got some good stuff from a few of you, and we're gonna go look through those real quick. So I'm going to start with what Lillian sent me because it was very effective. As soon as I find that window again. So what Lillian sent included a ground plan and some drawings of the different elements. That's similar to what Ellie also sent in her document. So I'm going to do this number. All right. So you can see Lillian has this ground plan, which is marked as 25 by 16. And then we have the picnic table, 6 chairs, and then some fencing around the sides. And then the next page is a detailed drawing. That is not it. Did it only save the one drawing? Bummer. All right, one moment. I gotta open up some other stuff here. Okay, so while this is opening, managed to only actually save one of these. My drive. All right, now I gotta share this one. All right, so here we have a detailed drawing of the arbor or archway we talked about having on stage left. And then we've got dimensions, we've got sizes and shapes, and 2 different views, including a note that we could add vines to match the lattice or cover with bendy ply. And then the next one we have is a detailed drawing of the gate, again with dimensions and rough information on that. And then finally, drawings of the 2 sections of a fence, including a number of units, and then notes on construction. So very well done for translating it into something buildable, which gives us the ability to then take that drawing and do this with it. I'm assuming you guys can see my SketchUp drawing that I built from Lily's thing. Correct? There we go. Okay. It was hidden. But yeah, okay, so we can zoom in here. So what I did was using the dimensions Lily gave us. We have our archway with some lattice on the outside and our fences with lattice panels, which if we flip them around, we can kind of see how they're constructed. So we've got our fence back here. We've got a picnic table and our 6 chairs. So we've got a rough layout of all the stuff we need for the set, right? So this gets us to a point where we can start actually doing detailed drawings and cut lists for all of these various elements of our scenery that we can then pass on to the shop to construct it. The other nice thing about this is once we've built this model, we can do things like, we can go to our 3D warehouse and find ourselves a person. What we can then do is, once this model loads, is we can put people on our set to get a sense of proportion. Now, the first thing we notice here is our archway here might be a little on the small side. So we just need to make some adjustments to scale for that. And that may have just been, I misinterpreted a dimension on the drawing that I was sent. So, but that gives us a rough idea of what our set is going to look like in real life, which makes it a whole lot easier to pass on that information to someone like the director. It helps coordinate with our lighting designer, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we have a scenic design. You'll notice that we also have some lights in the air, which is what we'll get to next. So based on what Pratik sent me, which was a description, which I have turned into a lovely magic key here. So Pratik's idea was we would have a front cool and a front warm light, and a side cool and a side warm, and then LEDs on the side. So what I've done is he provided me that information in text format. I translated it to this visual format, which is one I just like to use a lot. Basically what you have is your lighting area with your person in the center. This is the top of their head, shoulders, feet. So you're looking straight down at them. So you get an idea of the angles and the colors the lights are coming in to light the scene. And then from this information, including angles and everything, we're then able to translate that, switching back over here to our SketchUp model. We're able to translate that into where our lights would go. So I'm going to grab the camera, I'm going to look at it straight down and zoom out. So the way I arrived at this is, in fact, if I come in and I select one of these lighting areas, what I did is I created our lighting area circle. I drew lines out, which I have since deleted because they made it very visually cluttered. I should have put them on another layer so I could turn them on and off. But this light is our front cool. This one is our front warm. That one's our side cool. And that one's our side warm. And then I just repeated, let me actually do this. So that is the 4 lights that are focused at this area. And then by cutting and pasting that into our 9 lighting areas, we have a rough idea of where the lights need to go. Now, the problem, of course, with this is because I don't have in this model the actual grid and the rest of the space. Where these are is probably floating in midair in between the pipes that we would actually hang them from. So what the next step would be to then plot these on the pipes as they exist in the space and shift them to where they actually would end up in the long run. Fortunately for us at North, the grid is very regular. It's on 4-foot centers, so it makes it very easy to just paste and repeat basically when you're designing your, excuse me, when you're designing your plot as well. At Central, it's not so easy because our lighting positions are less convenient as far as that goes. But this gives us, again, a rough idea of where everything lands in our space. So we've got our lighting areas and our lights and our scenery and our people. And that sort of fills in the physical requirements of our show. Excuse me. All right, so we have this information, and what's the next step now that we've started to plot the physical requirements of our show? Again, this doesn't cover things like costume design and that sort of thing yet. None of you submitted costume design. I'm assuming that's not your field of interest, which is also fine. Costume designers at this point would have renderings and fabric swatches and that sort of thing for constructing garments. So the next step is then to translate all of this into paperwork. Now, paperwork, not the most fun thing ever, but vitally important to what we do. Because that's how we copy, that's how we make sure everyone is getting all of the information. That's how we make sure that the information is kept up to date and accurate, and that everyone knows when we have changes. So we're going to look at lighting paperwork next, because, well, honestly, it's the thing I'm most familiar with generating. So we have all those lights in the air. Now we need to document how they work. So the next step is going to be our lighting paperwork here. So what I've done is translated those lights in the air to where they would be in space. To be honest, I cheated and used an old plot to get lighting positions. At North, we label all of the pipes going upstage to downstage with letters, and we do right to left with numbers. And then, so each light has a channel number. Now the channel number is assigned by the designer. So as you're generating that paperwork, you would do that. The convention I am using here is that 101 through 109 would be our front warm lights. 111 through 119 would be our front cool. 121 through 129 side warm. 131 through 139 side cool. And then each one of those, 101, 111, 121 are all area A, which in this case would be our downstage right area. So I've numbered the areas going across A, B, C, D, E, F, G, E, H. G, H, J. I am bad with letters. You'll notice I skip I because I is too easily confused with one when you're writing things down. So I generally skip I, frequently skip O as well. For those of you who are in the theater at Central, there is no row I in the seating either. So all of our front warms are grouped together. All of our front cools are grouped together, et cetera, and then the last digit of the number tells us which area it's focused at. Makes it very convenient. I also have that documented. I have where it's focused, and then where it is physically in space, the position, meaning the hanging position, so it's hung on pipe K, and it is the first instrument on pipe K. When you create the lighting plot, all of this would be labeled. It would be a source 4 with a 19-degree barrel. I know in your paperwork critique, you listed Shakespeare's, but since we're designing for North and they have source 4s, I converted it. And then what color goes in. There are also spaces for gobo if we were going to add a gobo. any accessories like irises, barn doors, etc. Any notes, so anyone using this paperwork could add notes and comments to each other. And then the hang and focus columns I put in there as check boxes so that the crew, as they hang the lights and focus the lights, can check them off. So at a glance, we can tell what is still to do using filters and whatnot. So this is the beginning of our lighting paperwork. You will also notice that the address column is not filled in, because generally with lighting, the address for conventional lights is whatever dimmer it's plugged into, and it's generally easier for the crew to take care of that as they hang the lights, simply because it's generally easiest to plug into whatever dimmer is most readily most readily available based on where you're hanging it, and the designer really doesn't need to worry about that until patch. However, if we scroll down here and we see our cyc lights, I did include addresses for those. That is because our LED color source lights need to be digitally addressed, and then they have data going to them, which is easier to do before the light goes into the air. So assigning them makes sense before they get hung. But, excuse me, as you hang the lights, you would mark these off and fill in the addresses so that when you're ready to put them in the board, you can do that part as well. So this is a very basic example of lighting paperwork. The nice thing about this is that you can do things like sort. So if we wanted to just see them sorted by where they're focused, we can switch it to that way. And we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, J. So we've got all our areas. Obviously, psych gets kind of thrown in the middle because it starts with a C. There is software called Lightright that is specifically designed for lighting paperwork and is smart enough to actually understand that letters mean something different than words. It can also interpret things like know the difference between a 19-degree and a 26-degree instrument for counting those things. You can record gel sizes so that you can take this list and get a list of exactly how many of each gel size you need cut, that sort of thing. However, I'm not good with Lightright, and for the purposes of this is sufficient. And for a lot of what we do, this is sufficient. So this allows us to put a lot of that sort of thing together. All right, any questions on that part? So that's an example of lighting paperwork. All right. So that's a starting point for that. Now we're going to look at some of our other kind of paperwork we would generate. So for construction, the next thing we'd be generating are working drawings and cut lists and shop order sort of information. So I'm going to pull up some of those, which I should have done in advance. I apologize for being a mess this session. I just spent entirely too much time designing the set because that was super exciting for me because it looks really cool, like Lily said. Because that sort of thing is way more fun than making slides. All right, so we'll look at one of our previous shows here. Find one that I did good drawings for. And we've got some other things I will pull up from this file as well shortly. All right, so one of the examples would be from our Les Mis set. I'll go ahead and open this file and share it with you. All right, so this drawing includes a construction drawing of all of the different components for this particular scenic unit, which is the stage left arch, and we need to build 6 of them total. And then I have them labeled arch header and arch supports, and and at the top is a platform with 1/2-inch ply bottom skin. So this is one of several drawings I created so that we can view that. If you can see on the screen now, there are a lot of them. So I had those arch supports. This other file here is the drawing for that arch support, which is loading. Why it's loading partial screen, I don't understand, but hey, I'm not in charge of computers. So that arch support is simply a rectangle. I'm a bad scenic drafter for this one because I didn't actually say what kind of wood we're supposed to be using. In this case, I happen to remember it was 2x4. But I have each board in it labeled along with total sizes and shapes of everything. So board A, which is our 2 outside boards, we need a total of 2 per item per arch support for a total of 24 pieces that are cut to 7 foot 2 3/4 inches long. Unit B, which is 1 foot 6 inches, we need 2 per unit, so a total of 24. And we need those to be 1 foot 6. And all of that sort of thing is drawn out so that when we give this to the people in the shop, they know exactly what they need to cut and what they need to build this particular scenic unit. So when you're designing scenery, the more detail you can give, the better, because the more specific you are with your drawings, the easier it is for your crew to build them without having to come and ask you questions. The beauty of that is when you do something like have a scenic unit like this drawing, which is a fairly complicated unit, but is made of a bunch of different components. It's really nice when you can hand a drawing like this to your crew and come back an hour later and have a piece of scenery. That's always a much more satisfying thing than having to answer questions about it several times because you weren't clear with your information, right? So that's kind of what the next step is when you're doing your scenic design, is to then translate your, cut back to this one, your drawing like this, right, into a list of the items you would need, which, if you'll remember, Lillian did a very good job with on her drawing of this piece of scenery. Indicated that these are 2x4s, indicated the sizes of them, indicated the size of our lattice panel, and then with the drawing, you could build this just from that paperwork that Lillian generated, which is exactly what the goal is. And in fact, my only criticism of this drawing would be that I would take it and turn it 90 degrees just so that the long pieces were at the bottom. So I'm gonna do that piece specifically. Like that. The advantage that serves is then when you're moving the piece of scenery, you don't have a seam at the floor that can get snagged on things and pulled apart. And again, that's the sort of thing that you just sort of learn over time, and then once you learn it, you remember it. And there are times where you would do it the other way. I know in Ellie's notations, there was a note about how do we attach it to the floor. Fortunately, in both of our spaces, we have properly built stage floors that have an expendable top layer and a good hardwood bottom layer. So the way I would attach these to the floor is by putting screws directly through the bottom into the floor. And then with the rest of the scenery around it, that would give it enough support once these are tied in that it shouldn't wobble. And if it does, we'd add some small bracing in the back or something along those lines. So that's the generation of paperwork for scenic design. Looking at other design aspects, each department has its own sort of paperwork that we want to generate. So we're going to switch back over. We're going to continue looking at our Les Mis paperwork. So we're looking at the sound department. Now for a musical, which is obviously a much bigger show than we're working on here, you would have a whole range of things that you need to keep track of. In this case, you would have sound cues and microphone cues. So for example, this document is what we call a mic plot. And what it is very tiny on your screens, I'm betting. And it's still loading. We'll make it big. Okay, so we have each actor's name down the side, and we have a list of scene numbers across the top, right? And then what our sound designer has done is indicated what microphone each performer has on for each scene, because there were several scenes where, for example, Lena down here has mic 5 through scene 6, and then Braden has it through scene 7. And then it goes back to Lena for the end of the show. So that tells us we need to make some mic swaps, which means we need a crew member backstage to assist with that. We also need to make sure we know any changes that need to happen for those microphones in terms of settings and settings on the soundboard to do that. And then you can see here again on the second tab, the assignments. Mic 5 is assigned to Braden and Lena, so we know again where that mic is during the show. So that is one document that we need. Here, if Zoom didn't cover up my tabs. In addition, we have inputs. I would appreciate it if you would use more informative names, perhaps, than we always get. For example, inputs and things to Electric Boogaloo. Entertaining, not the most useful thing. One thing to remember with your paperwork is it's not just for you. It's for anyone else working with you. It's also for what is called the bus accident scenario, which is if your entire production crew was in a horrific bus accident and couldn't be at the theater, could your staff continue just from the paperwork alone, right? So use your documentation wisely. So what we have here is a notation of the channel on the board, what they've named it, what the field input is. So for our floor mics, because they plug in, it's marked where it goes in the wall, and then what snake it's connected to. So basically this whole list is the connection chain, so that if there's an issue, we know exactly where it goes. The various wireless mics, where things patch, the receivers, et cetera, et cetera. So that gives us the ability to keep track of where everything goes. And we have an input tab and we have an output tab. So we have tracks of where each thing goes. So those are some of the examples of the paperwork that sound needs to generate to be able to do their thing. We'll look at our props list next. So for our props list, our props designer had a list of each item in the show. Again, once it's loaded, I will make it bigger so we can see it clearly. But each item in the show and what the status of that item is in terms of the progress made on it. So wooden crates, 5. It was decided we would build those and where they are currently, any notes about them, what scenes they're used in, so that, again, at a glance, you can see what's happening with different things. Excuse me. So obviously this was not from the end of the production. This is a version that was earlier on. And in this case, we've taken advantage of some of the aspects of spreadsheets that make it very convenient. We have drop-down lists for the status that say build, not started, in progress, by, pull, waiting, and finished. We have a list of scenes over here that we can select so that your documentation is more consistent. It also lets you do sorting and things a little more easily. And we can define all of those sorts of things using these data fields on other sheets. So that would be our list of props that we need. We also have a props transition sheet that is a list of what scenes, what the prop is, what side it starts on, and what side it comes off if it needs to be. This is to help keep track of where things are, especially props that go on and off multiple times. So, for example, this stone bench here has to leave quickly out R3. R3 was stage right, arch number 3, I believe. We had a fairly complicated, there were lots of entrances and exits on the set, and since some of them moved, it ended up being a fairly complicated set of notations, right? So those are some of the props paperwork things that you need to develop. Wardrobe. The costume plot is a big part of what we do for costumes. So here we have each character, actor, what character they play, and then what they wear in each given scene. So at 200% here again, so you can see what's going on. All right, so we have the actor's name, their character name, what they wear in a given scene, and then what they wear. So each time they have a change. So we know he's in this costume in this scene, and then in another completely different costume in the very next scene. So we know there's a quick change there. There's no hard and fast rules on this paperwork. Obviously, the more information you can put in them, the better. I am personally a fan of lots of color coding, but you do you, because the idea is that you need to be able to access this information quickly and easily and communicate it quickly and easily. So the method that works best for you in particular is the method that is best, if that makes sense. So we have the costume plot, we have scene and breakdown, we have a quick change list. I'll pull up here. So this is a list of who is managing quick changes for different characters. So each member of the costume crew has different people they are responsible for any quick changes for. So again, just an easy way to communicate information to your crew. as you can see, as I scroll through these folders, there's a lot going on. Paperwork becomes kind of your life if you are a crew head, but it does make your job much, much easier in the end. So yeah, that's what the next step generally is after you've solidified your concepts, you've decided what you're going to build and where. Weird. You don't need to see my face behind me. Once is enough. It helps keep track of all of the different things you're doing so that your crew, your fellow designers, your directors, your staff all know where you are in the production, where your department is at a glance. Communication is key. The more information you can have documented, the simpler it becomes to actually execute your design. So as you're building these design ideas and as you're refining them and cleaning them up, the paperwork that you generate at this point is the thing that makes it possible to translate the idea in your head into something that your audience will enjoy in the end, or will get the story that you want to tell told, right? So fundamentally, at this stage of design, you have done most of the artistic portion of your design that you can do until the stuff is in the space. At this point, as a scenic designer, you should have decided on colors and finishes and textures and all of those sorts of things that go into what your set is going to look like. As the lighting designer, you have refined what your moods and your ideas are. You've refined the list of, you've refined your cue list. You've gotten rough ideas. Obviously, theater being a collaborative art, it's still going to change. It is also a living, breathing thing. No 2 days are the same. So as you go through the process, you're going to find things that need to change, and you're going to find things that interfere with each other and you have to adjust, but other things where an idea comes to you later in the process that makes it something you want to adjust as well. So you have to have these ideas as solidified as you can, but you also have to be working from the standpoint of you can't be so married to an idea that you can't shift out of that idea, that mindset, if the circumstances of the production make it sensible to change that. Realized as I was saying that I did not talk about cue sheets. So I'm going to show you one of those real quick. All right, so here we have my lighting cue sheet from Les Mis. So I've broken it down by scene and my cue numbers. And these cue numbers correspond to the numbers in the book that I will give to the stage manager that I've documented in my script. I have in here, even pre-show work lights. I have blackout check, all the things we do before the show starts, my starting cues. I also have notes from my assistant designer as we worked on things. This was a way we communicated things. But each cue has a cue number, what page of the script it's on, what the actual cue line is, whether that's an actual spoken line or a entrance or exit cue, and then what that cue does, what the cyclorama is doing. It depends on the show whether I treat those as separate inputs. And then finally, the length of time for the cue to execute. And again, as we built this, these adjusted day by day, cue by cue, we adjusted them based on what the show needed, hence the large number of notes and stuff. So those are just some of the kinds of paperwork you generate at this stage in the thing. For scenic design, scale drawings and cut lists are super important. For lighting design, your light plot and your cue lists are super important. Costume plot and renderings, props lists, all of those sorts of things make your life easier in the long run. Because as a designer, the next stage isn't yours. The actual construction and building of that is not your work as a designer. Now, depending on the size and the scope of the theater and how it works, it may very well still be your job, but it is not your design work at that point. The actual building of the scenery is a craft. It is a skill that is different than the design aspect. So your goal with generating this paperwork is to make it so those craftspeople who are executing your design can do it in the best way possible to actually have that design be something that is as close as possible to the concept you had in your head. Now, with theater, one of the nice things is, as we get to the end of that process and the things are built, we kick back into design mode. That is the point where costume designers and scenic designers can sort of refine finishes on things, add accessories, add set dressing, that sort of thing, to help fine tune what is on the stage to better match their concept, which may have changed in some aspects between the beginning of the build process and the end as well. This is the point at which the lighting designer fine tunes and takes that list of descriptions in that cue list and the lights that are put in the air and puts them together in a way that you play with the subtlety and the transitions and the movement of the light to actually get to that design level. This is where your sound designer is setting the levels to set the mood they want. They're doing that movement between speakers. That's what Tech Week is. It is the final chance to clean up that design element to get it to that final product and make sure everything is meshing together and everything is working together to the end goal of your actors being in a world that you bring your audience into to tell them your specific story. So that's kind of what the next step is in design, is you've reached this point where you've got your concept, you've got your idea, now you make it ready to build. All right, so any questions on any of that? Or any questions on the specifics of how you get from point A to point B? I'd be happy to answer. All right, so that's really it for this week, I think. A little bit shorter. So what I'm going to say is that for our next meeting on Thursday, I would like you to pick an element of what you did for this week and generate the paperwork that you would give to a crew for that element. So, for example, if Lillian wanted to do a drawing of the gate on our set that included, all of the dimensions for each piece of lumber that is included and how they go together, find an image or an ordering site or whatever for the specific hinges you would like and the specific hardware, anything like that, so that if you were to hand me that drawing, I could go into the shop and come back with the scenic element as you envisioned it. So paint finishes, anything like that would be very useful for that. So for lighting, same idea. Generate a list of here's the lights I need with their colors and all of that sort of thing, so that if you were to hand it to me, I would know exactly what lights we needed where. That's your assignment for Thursday. So just a small section, just enough to demonstrate that you've got the idea of how that goes together. All right. Okay, so if there are not any specific questions at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.